Hi, I'm Jason Meers, and this is GPU Acceleration as part of the Vsphere 7 Home Lab series. So we're going to deal with three different types of GPU acceleration. The first one I'm going to talk about is software GPU, and this is the standard VMware SVGA 3D adapter, which is attached to every brand new virtual machine that you build inside Vsphere ESXi. It's the default. It's fine for most things unless you're doing really intensive graphic work like CAD CAM and maybe image editing, but for most people, and including office applications, it's been fine for years, although people are now starting to look at better graphics performance or enhanced graphics performance. And it's also true to say that certain products like Microsoft Office now expect GPU acceleration and fall back to software if they can't find it. So again, it's becoming a bit more of a nice thing to have rather than just an optional thing. Following on from this, the next thing we've got is dedicated GPU. So this is where we take a, shall we call it, a consumer graphics card or an entry-level server graphics card, and we put that in an ESXi host, and then we pass it through one-to-one to a virtual machine, and one virtual machine gets the dedicated use of one GPU or graphics processing unit. The next evolution of that is something we would refer to as a shared GPU. Most common form of this is something called Nvidia GRID, and this is a massively powerful server card which is designed to be used in a single server, but all the computing power of the total card is almost carved up into slices or profiles and dished out to end users, so that one of these GRID graphics cards can serve multiple users at the same time. So just to give you some pictures and some examples of this, imagine we've got a hypervisor, Vsphere ESXi, and we've got a number of end users and applications sat on top of it. So imagine that each one of those across the top here, that each one of these is an end user with a desktop or a desktop application that is running from a virtual machine on top of a Vsphere hypervisor. So as I said before, the default is that each of those people will get a standard VMware SVGA or SVGA 3D graphics card, which is provided entirely from compute and RAM. So processing cycles and RAM make up this software-based graphics card, and everybody there has got one. Just following on from that, because they're created out of software and memory, we can create as many of these as we want. So it is the default that almost every virtual machine you see, unless it's in an EUC or VDI environment, is going to have one of these software adapters. So that's the starting point. That's where most, certainly servers and most desktops have been in the past. If we then stuck four dedicated cards in, so these consumer cards, what we could do with those four cards that are sat inside the hypervisor, so what I'm trying to show here is we've got four cards which are plugged into the hypervisor, and then we're going to serve them up to the end users. So one of the things we've got here is the ability, you can now see hopefully, that each of these cards has been passed through to a virtual machine. So although most people are still using a software VGA adapter, four of those people have a dedicated card because we've got four GPUs or four dedicated GPUs in the server. It's a straight one-to-one pass-through. So the next logical progression of that is the one we talked about before, and something like this Nvidia GRID or a server GPU. So these cards are usually quite large, as shown on the picture, require quite a lot of power, but they've got a massive amount of processing cores. In my example, I've drawn 16 little green dashes across there to represent processing power. In actual, these tend to have thousands of cores or thousands of processing units on them. Just for ease of use, I've put 16 on there as an indication of kind of the power inside that card. So in an example here, I've taken all those 16 processing units or 16 lumps of power, and what I've done is I've passed them to four users, and I've shared it in slices. So each user has a quarter of the processing power of that card. So if each user's got a quarter of the power, we can fit four users on that card. So this is this slicing or this sharing of a GPU. Logical progression of that is, if I wanted to, I could maybe give 8 people an eighth of the processing power on that card. So that would look something like this. So again, very simplistic here. These cards tend to have thousands and thousands of cores, and I'm just oversimplifying it here just to give you an idea of how we would carve this thing up a little bit like a birthday cake. Next logical progression would be that we can actually mix and match this. So we might have some users on a shared GPU, that's shown down there. We might have some users using dedicated cards, and we might have some users still using the software VGA adapter. Now what that would mean is that these people here are using a software technology called Nvidia GRID or ATI MultiUser. So there's essentially a piece of software installed in Vsphere ESXi which allows that shared GPU, that big card in the bottom left hand corner, to be shared with multiple virtual machines on top. The way that we do the dedicated is with a standard feature in Vsphere for many years, Vsphere Pci Pass-Through, which is where we take a PCI card in the server and pass it through directly to a VM. And the software-based ones are using Vsphere SVGA 3D, again a software rendered version of a graphics card. And just to clarify that, what we would have to use Nvidia GRID and ATI user is something like an Nvidia GRID card or an ATI FirePro. To use something like PCI Pass-Through, we generally have a consumer-based card, something like an Nvidia GT, GTX or a low-end Quadro. On ATI, that would be something like a Radeon or a Radeon Pro. And for the software-defined one, it's basically just using the capabilities of Vsphere ESXi. So quite a detailed and busy diagram there, but just showing that a single ESXi server could be distributing graphics out to multiple virtual machines or multiple users using a combination of shared GPUs, dedicated GPUs and software. And again, just to mention there that with that Nvidia GRID and ATI MultiUser, we're sharing the GPU, but different users can have different amounts or different slices. The technical term for this is profiles. So you issue a user with a profile and it goes and finds a GPU that can issue that amount of GPU compute to its own virtual machine. So as I said, quite a busy slide there. What we'll do is just strip that back a little bit again. So if we go back to that same slide but without as many of the boxes of the arrows, if we want to do this Nvidia GRID or ATI MultiUser from a shared GPU, that's exactly what we call it. It's shared GPU. If we want to use these everyday cards, these commodity cards or consumer cards, and when we use PCI Pass-Through, that's what we call dedicated GPU. And if we're going to do it through the standard Vsphere SVGA adapter, that's what we would call a software GPU. So again, just an oversimplification of just how that all fits together. So if we now go back to the first slide that we had again, hopefully this looks a little bit more understandable or less scary than it did to begin with. Just essentially back to those three different types: software, dedicated and shared. They are the three main types of GPU acceleration available in Vsphere. So that was GPU acceleration as part of the Vsphere 7 Home Lab series. Thank you for your time and I hope you found that useful.